Hi, it's Loren Lockman from the Tanglewood Wellness Center, and I am here this afternoon, beautiful sunny afternoon, with my dear friend Nora Lenz, who, we go back a ways now, don't we, Nora?
12, 13 years.
Something like that. Nora is visiting us here in Costa Rica from
Seattle.
frigid Seattle. I knew Seattle, I was just thinking
Damp.
of the right damp, cold wintertime, February Seattle. And getting ready to go back there, in fact. You've been here for nearly a month. Nearly 4 weeks. You've completed a 21-day fast. We're not going to talk about that, though. We're going to talk more about something that is very interesting to me and I think to a lot of other people. And that is, people ask me all the time, what should they do with their dog or their cat or their giraffe or their blue whale? And I just don't have a lot of blue whale expertise.
Very few people do.
Yeah, but so I've been helping humans with their help for 25 years. But I really don't have any expertise with animals. But you do, don't you?
Yeah, about 20 years ago I started feeding my dog raw food, and I had made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I tweaked it and I found a formula, and then I started doing more research and found out what the actual wild model is for dogs, for their physiology, just like we do with
We have
humans.
an Alpo for us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
But we
It's
don't
not
have
Alpo then.
No, it's not Alpo. No, we don't actually have any wild humans that we can model ourselves after, but we do have wild dogs, and that information, those field studies have produced a lot of information about what dogs should be eating and when they shouldn't be,
what they do best
shouldn't
with.
be eating.
Right.
And the more that we dog owners and cat owners put that information to work, the more our dogs will stay out of the vet's office.
Okay, well, so maybe, maybe we can talk about some of the most important things that someone could do to help their dog or cat, let's start with dogs, improve their health.
Right.
Obviously, diet's a big one.
Well, it's the biggest, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that dogs and cats live imperfect lives. Your cats here probably live as close to a perfect life for a domestic cat as possible. But most dogs and cats, they don't get enough fresh air, they don't get enough exercise, but the biggest factor contributing to their health or lack of it is diet. And unfortunately, the vet industry and the pet food industry have partnered to convince people that their only option is to feed commercial pet food.
Processed garbage.
Even though more people are finding out what that stuff is made of, it really hasn't had that much effect overall on the industry. And so the first thing that you can do, absolutely, is to get your dog or cat off of commercial pet food.
Well, what is that stuff made of?
It's made of, among other things, rendered animals, and that's rendered is a pretty word that's used to describe any animal that isn't eaten by humans or a part of an animal that's been cut away from humans or from the human food processing system. And
so it's all the stuff that we wouldn't want to eat, basically.
Well, and it's even worse than that because rendering plants buy from labs, medical labs, where animals have died from, fatal injections of poisons.
Really?
They buy from animal shelters where the animals have been killed, euthanized.
Right.
And there's lots of other things too, like basically what commercial food, pet food is it's what's left over from the commercial or from the human food processing industry. It's just
leftovers.
Waste. It's waste.
And a lot of filler.
Filler, yeah. Grains. I mean, now they're making grain-free foods, but they're finding other ways to put in cheap filler, like using pea starch and potato starch, which really aren't that great for dogs either.
Sure.
And on top of that, you want this stuff to sit on the shelf for 6 months or a year. You got to put some pretty powerful preservatives in it.
Of course.
And so this
those are nasty toxic chemicals. If you're not aware, there's no preservatives we should be consuming or our dogs should be consuming.
That's right. It's absolute, it's just toxic waste every time the dog eats. And people also feed their dogs way too much. The dogs are always acting hungry, and that's because they are hungry. They're never getting...
Because they're not getting real nutrition.
They're not getting their needs met.
Sure.
So they're always looking for food.
But they're not eating more garbage calories.
Right. But you can't let that guide how you feed or how much you feed your dog, because you'll way overfeed him
Yeah.
on this garbage and just make him sick.
Sure.
And dogs are, dogs are so commonly fed, especially in North America. People think that, people know that when human beings are slim, they're trim from their shoulders to their hips.
Right.
Well, when a dog is straight from his shoulders to his hips, he's fat. They should have a concave gut. They should have a cut.
I see.
And vets sometimes in their honest moments will say, skinny dogs don't get sick. And it's true. Dogs are supposed to be lean.
Yeah.
They have to be lithe and agile in order to catch their prey.
Sure.
So anyway, and we can talk about the practical application of this information too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, someone's feeding their dog a typical dog food, processed dog food diet. How do they change? Can they just go from one to the other, or do they need to transition?
Yeah, great question. I have, by the way, I have a website called nomorevetbills.com, and I gave it that kind of audacious name because I had seen so much dog sickness and cat sickness
Yeah.
that can so easily be reversed
Yeah.
with proper feeding, and proper feeding is not complicated, and fasting.
Right. And by the way, I mean, I think it's important to point out, you don't just have experience with your own animals. You've been working with other people's animals for a long time.
Right. I have a dog exercising business, and I board dogs, and about 3/4 of my clients now feed their dog raw food. So when they come to my house, they get fed properly.
Right.
And sometimes they even get fasted when the owner, is okay with that.
Yeah.
And I've done a few extended fasts with dogs, not with cats so much, but with dogs.
Do you have a hard time keeping them off the internet like I do?
Not really.
Not so much.
No, not so much. In fact, you never even notice any change in their behavior.
No?
It's not like they mope around like we do when we're fasting.
Right.
They're just as energetic. They don't seem to miss food.
Yeah.
And that's because dogs are so adapted to the gorge and fast model in
sure.
the wild.
That is what happens in the wild for many species,
Right.
probably including human beings.
Yeah.
We would eat, we would have no food for a while, we would eat again later.
Right. Yeah. And that's another reason actually why dogs are always acting hungry, because they never get satisfied. When a dog's stomach is empty, it's actually like an accordion. It folds up and it goes dormant.
Uh-huh.
And it's not uncomfortable for the dog. It's a natural state of being for the dog. That's the state of being, in fact, that the dog is supposed to be in most of the time.
Sure.
And so when food comes in, the stomach expands, and the stomach has glands on the inside of it which secrete digestive fluids, which means when the stomach is full, the digestion is maximized.
Right.
So the absolute best way to feed your dog is to find out what that maximum is, give that to him a couple times a week, and then not feed him the other days.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a big change for most people.
yeah, I know.
And dogs don't resist that kind of change?
Well, we need to talk about transition. The problem that many people encounter when they try to switch their dogs to a raw food diet is that the dog still has kibble in the gut,
Right.
and kibble takes a long time to digest.
Right.
So it's sitting there, and they try the raw food on top of it.
Right.
And if the encounter happens in the stomach, the dog vomits. If it happens farther down in the intestine, they get diarrhea.
Right.
So it can be a huge mess, and people can just throw up their hands and say, enough of
Can't
that
do
raw
this, it's
food
not
business.
worth it. Right.
Well, it's such an easy fix. All you have to do is just
Wait.
fast the dog for at least a day, and then you can also start slow. I actually have this, what I call it, rotational mono feeding, which is, it just involves feeding fruit one day, and then feeding vegetables, and really the only vegetables that I recommend, and it's because they resemble overripe fruit in composition, is sweet potatoes, cooked, and yams,
Cooked.
and pumpkin too, perhaps. And then so you can fast the dog for a day, and this is all included in a booklet that I sell on my website. But you can fast the dog for a day and then start them on a little fruit. If they won't eat fruit, most dogs will eat cooked yams or cooked sweet potatoes. And then on the third day, you start with meat, and it's almost guaranteed that you'll have no problems at all.
Mm-hmm. And so now there are people out there that promote a raw diet, a vegan diet for dogs,
Right.
with the exception of bones, right?
Right.
Bones and raw food. You're talking about feeding them meat. You believe
Right.
that dogs need to eat meat.
Well, the carnivore classification, it runs all the way from a species that might be practically indistinguishable from an omnivore to an animal like a cat that's an obligate
carnivore.
Right. So on the omnivore end of the scale, we've observed wolves going months without a kill, months without meat.
Yeah.
And what that means is they're survivors. They can adapt.
Sure.
And especially if people take their dog off of commercial food and put them on, some vegan diet or homemade vegan diet or whatever, they can notice lots of improvements right away.
Yeah.
But I've seen problems develop over the long term, and I think the absolute best solution for vegans who have a moral objection to feeding meat to their dogs is my rotational program, which allows you to minimize the feeding of meat, because you only feed it. I mean, you really wouldn't, if you were, absolutely opposed to feeding meat, you could only do it, once a week or a couple times a month.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time, feed plant foods.
Listen, I understand both perspectives. I mean, I understand the ethical vegans who don't want to buy meat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to buy meat. But I have chosen to take into my household 2 cats who are obligate carnivores.
Right.
And I don't think it's fair. My perspective is, if I don't want to feed cats meat, I shouldn't have cats.
Right.
Because that's what they need.
Right.
If a dog needs meat to be healthy, at least sometimes, then I guess that's what you need to do.
Right. And another thing that people don't consider, especially vegans, is that they might be rejecting one despicable industry, and that's fine. That despicable industry should be rejected.
Yep.
But they're also making it more likely that they're going to have to patronize another
one.
despicable industry, which is the vet industry.
Right.
And if you think it's medicine, that medicine is backward, veterinary medicine is so much worse. They're
Is it really?
so vulnerable. They just came out a couple of years ago
Huh.
with their objection paper to raw feeding. That would be like doctors en masse saying don't eat fruits and vegetables. It's absolutely crazy.
That's absurd. I mean, as far as I know, for years the 2 big Bibles on how to take care of your pets have said as much raw food as possible.
Yeah.
How can the vet industry now turn around and say that's no good?
Well, they just, like I said, formed this very tight partnership with the pet food
I
industry,
see.
and they feed on each other because the
Of course.
food industry keeps the customers
Keeps the
coming
animals sick.
back.
Right.
And it's really a brilliant marketing device, and it's convinced everybody that that's the best thing to do. But it's horrible.
I hope it's clear. If you watch my videos normally, you probably already understand that cooking food creates toxic substances and kills much of the nutritional value and chases out all the perfect water, or most of it. There's no reason to ever eat cooked food, and that goes for every other species as well as it does for us.
And it's so far beyond just being cooked. I mean, this stuff that we're
Processed
feeding,
garbage.
It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And I don't think people have enough realization of how much further harm is done by the vet industry.
Yeah. I didn't realize that.
They're not as well organized as the medical associations, so there's less pressure on them to innovate.
Right.
and mobilize. There is a huge movement out in the community, the pet owning community, towards holistic, and so the vets are getting extra training in sort of holistic methods, but they're not holistic. They're just as reductionist as the regular vets, because they'll find out what the symptom is and they'll give you some herb or some remedy to shut it down, instead of talking to people about fasting their dogs, which we still need to talk about,
Yeah.
or their cats.
Yeah.
So, as far as fasting goes, fasting dogs, it's much easier to fast dogs than it is to fast cats. With
Yeah.
cats, there's a bit of, there are a couple contraindications with cats.
Well, and many people say they can only go 3 or 4 days.
That's not true. The only real problem is if you have a fat cat. Cats are so maladapted to digesting fat that they can't even digest the fat that comes off of their bodies as it's being, autolyzed during the fasting process. So their organs, if they're already compromised,
The liver's going to take a beating.
Right.
Which is, so the cats that most need to fast are at least able to.
Yeah, but
In a
in those
sense.
cases, when you have a really fat cat, there have been obvious mistakes made.
Right.
So what you need to do is just transition the cat
Get him to a better diet,
onto a clean diet.
get him
And
slimmer.
cats can be difficult to transition, but they're super easy to feed. They're very picky. They don't like change, so you have to introduce it tiny little dribs and drabs until you get them, on board with it, and then they'll lose weight, and then, you could fast them if you wanted to, but chances are once you do that, they're not going to have symptoms anymore.
Right.
With dogs, it's much easier. Just stop feeding them. There's no change. Just a few months ago, I fasted a dog that had a gigantic hot spot on her face, just oozing, messy, not healing. The owner was exasperated, and she asked me what I would do, and I said, the only thing that I know of that can clear up something like that is fasting. And she goes, okay, do it. And she brought her dog to me, and the dog stayed with me for 10 days. I fasted her for 7 days, and I fed her on the 8th day, and by then it was a little red, but it was
Almost
clear.
gone.
It was almost gone. It was almost clear.
Amazing.
So, yeah, and she had been trying for weeks before that with the topicals and the antibiotics and all of that stuff.
Right.
So, as far as
Cool.
transitioning your cats, I'm thinking that it'll be easy for you because they have such a great lifestyle here, and really the only thing that's wrong with it is what they're fed. And they have access to wild foods, so they chase insects, they chase lizards,
They do.
eat those things.
They do?
So they haven't lost their taste for, those foods. And so, and even if you have to, take the food and braise it a little bit, and this is all in my transitioning essay. If anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to send it free of charge to anybody.
Great.
Transitioning a cat.
Yeah.
Even if you have to braise the meat just a little bit on the surface to get it to smell familiar to the cat, then that should be
Because
the
they
deal
were used to
maker.
eating cooked
Right.
meat all this time.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share that you think is really important for people to understand at this point? Easy tips. I mean, these are some really valuable ideas. And of course, fasting is the most powerful way to let the organism heal itself. Obviously, optimizing your diet is always a critically important step. Really great stuff, Nora. Anything else you'd like to?
Just the only thing I can think of is that people tend to over-research, and there's a lot of crap floating around on the internet, like
Sure.
there is with human nutrition.
Sure.
And the best way is the simple way. Dogs have very simple needs. They need the bodies of plant-eating animals, and they need digestive rest.
Yeah.
And that's really all
That's
they
it.
need.
Yeah.
A little plant matter, they can probably live without plant matter. If you don't want to feed any, fruit or yams or anything at all, that would probably be fine too, as long as you don't overfeed meat.
Okay.
The meat that we have especially in North America, is very fatty. So anyway,
Yeah.
the details are all in mine.
Great. And we'll put your website address here so people can find you easily.
Great.
And I very much appreciate your sharing. This is really great information. And I hope if you're watching this and you have cats and dogs, you will do everything you can do to give them the best possible. I'm going to be going into your information, figuring out how we can get our cats eating as well as possible. Thanks, Nora.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure.